Tormenta Rampaging Run is the new 309-foot Giga coaster at Six Flags over Texas. I love over Texas's coaster lineup, but they have lacked the addition of a true headlining coaster since arguably the addition of Titan in 2001. So this massive coaster was badly needed for this park. But is this the coaster that this park finally deserves? And how good is that first drop? Find out in this review. In late 2024, Six Flags abruptly announced the closure of various rides in preparation for new attractions, which were likely to open in 2026. For Six Flags over Texas, this included the closure of La Vibora, the last intimate bobsled coaster that was still very popular with families and had excellent uptime, at least on my visits. But with low capacity, the line could easily be 1 to 2 hours, even on a not so busy day. The coaster itself was fairly neutral with not much, but a small sense of speed, and it was a bit bumpy at times. But it was definitely growing on me as I kept getting more and more re-rides on it. The Spanish section around it also felt fairly complete. Even if it just had a few not too popular flat rides, it still gave a nice charm that other areas of over Texas just don't have. Especially because most of them are not themed to one of the Six Flags over Texas. I do wish Six Flags would have given guests a heads up to get last rides on attractions, especially something as unique as La Vibora. As I was at Over Texas for Fright Fest the last month La Vibora operated, but I didn't bother fighting the crowds to try and ride it as I had no idea that it was closing. The larger issue with closing La Vibora is that its closure represents a large shift away from family-friendly coasters. Part of this was just the nature of having an older collection of coasters to begin with, but with La Vibora, 7 coasters at Over Texas had a 42-inch or lower height requirement, which made this park very accessible to young thrill seekers. Fiesta Texas, for comparison, has averaged only 3 coasters that have a height requirement below 48 inches, though it is currently down to only 2 such coasters. Not only did Six Flags remove La Vibora, but Judge Roy Scream and Runaway Mine Train have had their minimum heights adjusted to now be 48 inches instead of the previous 42. This was done with little communication to guests, and over the summer of 2025, I saw multiple kids kicked off of Judge Roy Scream for failing the height check even though they had ridden it the previous summer, which just seems like a mean way to go about doing things. Now, Over Texas has 3 operating coasters at 42 inches or below, 2 kiddie coasters in Wile E. Coyote's Canyon Blaster, and Mini Mine Train, plus Pandemonium with its ride-along height. Shockwave, which is currently closed awaiting parts, I imagine, still has its 42-inch height requirement listed, but I'm skeptical that this will remain whenever it consistently reopens. Even as an adult, it has taken time adjusting to this new Texas. La Vibora was my go-to for road drama. I've had to wander around trying to find a ride to dash to, often ending up at Runaway Mountain or Pirates of Spelunker Cave, which neither really warrants a high need to rope drop them. On the flip side, Over Texas desperately needed a new quality coaster, as Six Flags, for whatever reason, has not seriously invested in upgrading this park's coaster lineup since 2001. I personally can enjoy Titan, but many coaster people find it slightly subpar coaster, especially for it being over 250 feet tall. And since Titan, the park added Pandemonium and Joker, generic Six Flags coasters. New Texas Giant was revolutionary for its time as the first RMC conversion, but it just doesn't click with me as a coaster. And in hindsight, you can tell that this park got the short end of the stick by getting that very first RMC, instead of waiting to have a truly world-class ride in that spot. Aquaman Power Wave is the only coaster that had been added to this park in the last 9 years. And while a simple clone layout, I really like Aquaman, and before Tormenta, had it as my second favorite coaster in the entire park. So, while not the headlining coaster that this park deserved, I did find Aquaman to be a very welcomed addition to the park. So, that's why the announcement of a record-breaking dive coaster brought so much excitement to Six Flags Over Texas, as many hoped that this would finally be that new headlining coaster that this park had been waiting such a long time for. B&M Dive Coasters, or vertical coasters from Roller Coaster Tycoon, always fascinated me as a kid, as this is the one type found in the original game, not counting the expansion packs, that seemed to be rare to find, or at least that's kind of how my brain thought since I discredited the rareness of wooden Wild Mouse coasters. With only a few installations at first, unless you travel to one of the Busch Gardens parks, you likely weren't running into one of these coasters. The main elements feature a holding brake, which looks scary but likely doesn't help the airtime on the first drop, and a large vertical drop. In recent years, these are becoming much more common, as Six Flags has added them to a lot of their parks. And it isn't surprising to see why, as they look terrific. With mixed feelings about La Vibora's removal, and Over Texas's inability to make nice things happen for us guests, I was hesitant to get excited about Tormenta. But then I visited for Christmas and finally saw the first drop, and man, even without trains running on it, it looked like one of the best drops in the world. Dr. Diabolical at Fiesta Texas, which is much shorter, has been hitting great for me on recent rides. But my favorite drop going into riding Tormenta was actually New Texas Giant's first drop, as that seems to always hit beautifully for me, even if it is maybe 50 feet too short. The theming for Tormenta transforms the Spain section of the park, which always had decent theming to begin with 3 flat rides and La Vibora, into Rancho de la Tormenta, as besides the teacups, Tormenta is the only thing in this section. Tormenta is themed after the running of the bulls, one of Spain's largest traditions, and Rancho de la Tormenta depicts an old and secluded Spanish village which welcomes guests with colorful banners and Spanish music. A small stage is set up in the corner of the section with a show, Flamenco Fever, which highlights flamenco dance similar to what Las Estrellas de Tejas does for the Mexican section of the park, which has also returned for the summer with the addition of this roller coaster. As I've grown to appreciate all of the various shows at Six Flags parks, having this coaster bring additional shows to Six Flags Over Texas is a big plus in my book. As for the theming, the town itself was named after the storms, Tormenta is Spanish for storm, that came through its location. But when a legendary bull was born that shared the town's name, it helped put the village on the map as matadors from all over Spain traveled to face off with Tormenta. But none could defeat him. Off to the side, the park promises that a new restaurant will be built as well, Cocina Abuela, that will showcase Spanish and Latin American food. Construction has just started on this, so when the coaster opened, this half of the area felt pretty empty, but it should all tie everything together very nicely once it is finished. For now, your festival attendants will navigate you through the queue line before making your way to the top of the coaster, and that holding break where you can wait to come face to face with Tormenta. As construction of this area is underway, I do hope they change up this queue, as many parts of it are in the hot sun. This is one of the only queue lines like this out over Texas, as most are nicely in the shade. And the park seems to know this, as they had people handing out free water in line, as well as a bunch of temporary fans that were around the queue area. On my visit, the queue seemed to hover around the 45-minute mark, though people tended not to squeeze in all of the switchbacks within the line itself. If it is filled to the first switchback by the coaster, this seemed to take about 20 to 30 minutes, and I feel the line will settle in about there on slower days once the newness of this coaster wears off. If most of the queue is full, but half the switchbacks aren't used, which is what I experienced, it will take about 45 plus minutes. A full queue line with all of the switchbacks full should take a little over an hour to get through. For opening day of this roller coaster, they have switched rope drop to after the Spain section, so this coaster was available before the 11 a.m. rope drop. And this coincides with switching the Looney Tunes dance party from a pre-rope drop show to an 11 a.m. showtime. So this seems like a slightly permanent change. This means to beat the crowds at opening, you will have to be one of the first ones scanned through security, and then race over to the spade section. The coaster did not open right away at 10:30, but should be going a few minutes later, similar to how Fiesta Texas opens Chupacabra and Boomerang. The queue, like all Six Flags coasters, also stays open right up until park close, if you want to hop in line at the end of the night. This coaster can run 3 trains, though likely the crew won't be fast enough to dispatch the trains where they can roll trains with that many on the course at once. It took until they had about 6 operators to check restraints towards the end of the night before I wasn't seeing 2 trains stacking up on the brake run. So normally, 2 train operations should be fine on this coaster. It does not have a dual load platform like SheiKra, which is unfortunate, as over Texas can see massive crowds. And I just don't see this coaster having a massive capacity like maybe it could. To help with loading, guests are instructed to place all items in a locker. These are not the regular Six Flags lockers that you can get a paper card to scan to reopen. Instead, you have to put in a code and a PIN number, and then remember your locker to open it back up on the other side. This is a rather long and cumbersome process, and opening it back up on the other side was giving guests issues. Most guests just placed their bags and cups in the few bins provided, as this was much quicker and easier to do. But I imagine they will become more strict about loose articles going forwards. If you bring a hat to the loading platform, for instance, they will send you back down to store it properly. If you try to ride without shoes, they will make you go back and get your shoes as well. They were letting people ride with their phones in their pockets though, so there's not a metal detector or anything like that. Once you climb the stairs, a grouper will assign you to a row. At times, this was quasi-strict, as they would just assign you to the next available seat. Even as a single rider, I normally did not get placed in an empty edge seat, just the next available open seat. It appears groupers are told to not really take requests for the front row, especially. Most guests were definitely asking for this. Though a few of the groupers did appear to not want to fight people on this, and were just kinda letting some groups wait extra for the front. If you ask nicely, you can normally request the back row since it's going to be open, as they start assigning front to back. But again, this really just depends on how strict they are being with seating assignments. And some of the strictness is just trying to help and move people through the line, since this coaster is so new. Even with all of this, seats were still going out empty on many of the trains, because people just weren't cooperating to make sure everything was filled. As for seat placement, I prefer the front row for the view and the wind in your face, even though I normally do not prefer front row rides on other B&M dive coasters. I also prefer edge seats for how they combine great views with extra forces, and my favorite ride came in a front edge seat. Most every seat rode very similar, so I wouldn't be too sad sitting anywhere, though the middle is a bit smoother if you're sensitive to a rattle, and the left side of the train seemed to have slightly strong forces, particularly positive Gs. The pre-lift is large enough that it actually offers mild forces as you swoop down, just enough to get you hyped for the ride as you quickly crank up the lift tail. Here, audio will play of people chanting, which can be heard around the park. It is quiet enough that off-ride it really sounds like guests are chanting this while they're going up the lift hill, so it adds great charm to the park as a whole. The views from the top are brief, but pretty impressive as you look down on the parking lot in Judge Royce Green, and everything just looks so tiny from as high as you are before rolling into the holding brake. This is only like a 3-second hold, so I would like more time to appreciate the views and kind of contemplate this drop, if I'm just being honest. Also, unlike other B&M dive coasters, Tormenta does not have staggered seating, so rows 2 and 3 will get very poor views of the impending drop, and even the front row does not travel super far over the drop itself, so you're not nearly entirely vertical like on a Vekoma tilt coaster. After the brake releases, you come face to face with Tormenta. Off-ride, this drop looks incredible, excellent, perfect, one of the best you'll ever experience. But on-ride, at least for me, it did not hit as nice as it looked, as I did not get nice drop feelings like I can from, say, the spikes on Aquaman or Dr. Diabolical's Beyond Vertical drop. Likely though, this drop will hit differently for different people. For reference, Mr. Freeze's incredible looking vertical spike just doesn't do much for me either. So if you're like me and a bit scared heading up that lift hill for the first time, just assume this drop is the same as Titan's, it's just 30 feet taller. May not look it, but it actually is only a 30-foot taller drop than Titan's. That being said, if you're in the front or on an edge seat, the wind in your face is a big plus, as you're plastered with wind from the speed of the drop. And there's a strong sense of just pure power, maybe it's that confronting the bull Tormenta himself, as you fall down this drop that is making it grow on me with multiple rerides. Then you're launched into the rest of the ride, and if you're in the front or on a wing seat, you can feel the speed as the wind will be hitting you so hard that tears will start being blown from your eyes. I'm not a huge inversion person, and with strong speed and sustained forces, these elements do kinda blend together, similar to the elements on Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, though the forces are strong but in a slightly different way. The largest feel of these elements is twofold. One, the trains have a noticeable back and forth shuffle entering and exiting most inversions. This isn't painful or annoying, you can just feel the whole train shake. Towards the outside of the train, or on those wing seats, this is combined with sustained vibrations or a rattle that shake you as you ride. I can enjoy bumpiness on coasters, and I wasn't too concerned with the B&M rattle on, say, Barracuda Strike at SeaWorld San Antonio. But with the forces on this coaster, this is something to monitor going forwards. The valley into the record-breaking Immelman is one of the smoother valleys with only a slight shuffle. These can be one of my favorite inversions, but here, the forces are just so strong that I don't notice much beyond the strong, enjoyable forces. This is followed by a quick dive down into a valley that has the same shuffles and roughness, followed by the record-breaking vertical loop. And it is nice to see Texas take back this record, as Superman Krypton Coaster had it for years. However, with your strong speed, you only get maybe a pinch of hang time at the top of the loop, which is a real miss, before blasting into the next valley. This is a bit longer, so the shuffling seems to last an extra second or so before looping towards the mid-course brake run. There's this weird twisting shuffle before the mid-course that feels like another shuffle-filled valley. On the right side, this is long enough to make this motion feel rather fluid as you level off, and then rise up into the brakes. On the left side of the train, it is a bit more snappy, and I do worry that this section could get pretty rough over time. With phenomenal pacing so far, the brake run gives you a brief reprieve from the bull Tormenta as you can catch your breath before diving into the second half. With the tight vest restraints of newer B&M coasters, this does not offer great airtime like the second drop on SheiKra at Busch Gardens Tampa Bay, but it is still a pretty large and steep drop that you can feel if you lean into it. The final inversions seem much smaller in scale, but they do offer similar strong and sustained forces to the previous inversions, complete with shuffling and roughness in the valley. The movement is long and drawn out like the initial one, so it just feels more like a standard inversion than anything extra special. The cutback only has you inverted briefly, so it's a much shorter reprieve from the shuffle and roughness than the other inversions, before a final turn into the brakes. These are on a slope, and you stop and start very abruptly, almost painfully so as you're jerked from one section to the next. And I do have concerns that this section could cause issues with this ride's uptime going forwards. So after your final wrestle with the brake run, which if there is a hot sun out, could be a small feat in and of itself, you end your experience with Tormenta. Overall, how good is Tormenta Rampaging Run? This coaster is built to be impressive to look at, all throughout Six Flags Over Texas, and it does not disappoint. The first drop looks incredible and offers a true sense of forces as you're thrown down it. It does not hit with great drop feelings, at least for me, but for many who are more sensitive to drops, this could be excellent. Then, you're thrown through a series of powerful inversions that truly wows you with the consistency of the forces while not beating you up in a terrible way, despite some strong shuffles and bumpiness. So you should come off wowed from the forces and pacing of this coaster. I did have a bit of trouble ranking Tormenta in my own personal rankings, as it is obviously a strong and terrific coaster, but it just lacked that truly excellent element, like say the top hat on Wrath of Zeus, or even the spike on Aquaman. But the overall strength and power of this experience, like with my enjoyment of Alpengeist, does elevate this coaster, especially when you can get the wind in your face and some bumpiness underneath you. I rank Tormenta right above Wrath of Zeus at Lin Wonder's Fuquoc. I do love New Age Vekoma coasters, and Wrath of Zeus is smooth while offering variety in its inversions, plus neat smaller airtime hills throughout the layout. But that top hat is excellent, and my favorite single element on any coaster, as I was squealing with excitement the whole way over it. I rank Tormenta right below the Steel at SeaWorld San Antonio. I do just love this coaster for its fantastic airtime over its various hills, and these have been hitting great once again in 2026, so I have been able to move it back up my personal rankings. As for if this is the coaster that Over Texas deserves, It is undoubtedly a strong thrill coaster that will leave guests impressed, and the park is committed to focusing around it as a pillar of Six Flags Over Texas for many years to come. So in that sense, it is really nice to see a bright future of thrills for this park. But a part of me will always miss La Vibora, as its end signifies a shift away from older family accessible coasters at this park, as progress begins to take away some of that magic that made Over Texas's coaster lineup so terrific, at least for me. So, we got the ride that this park deserves, but likely at a cost. What are your thoughts on Tormenta? Do you miss La Vibora? Let me know, and as always, Kapkun Krop.